Hey guys, let's take a look at another one of the Predictas that was dropped off recently. This particular owner dropped off two sets. A debutante, I believe, that came out of a hotel, and this very nice brown, or I guess they called it mahogany, princess set. He's got a real good knack for finding sets that are in great condition. It's got some discoloration on the white area, but that generally cleans up really nicely. But otherwise, it's all here, including the antenna. And the antenna is completely intact. However, I've not looked inside of either one of them. And this is actually my favorite part of the whole process. Because you imagine as you just do the same model over and over, it gets boring. The one thing that's different with every project is the triage, the initial checkout. I have no idea what I'm going to find inside. Has it been worked on before? Is it all original? That's what I'm hoping. If it's been worked on, what did they do to it? Did they screw it up? Did they do a good job? Is the picture tube any good? What's missing? What's broken? Is it even going to be possible? Are there unobtainium parts that are broken? We will see. We will see in a moment. So I think it's fair to say a smoker was around this set, causing the discoloration down here, and looks like it's on the inside of the screen. That's all easy enough to clean up and actually kind of helps preserve the set. Well, curious thing about all these sets. At least the princess model came in beige, brown, and red. Or they called it mahogany and vermilion, I think. But all the years I've been doing this, all the sets I've worked on, I've yet to find a red one. Beige seems to be the most common, followed by brown and red. I know they're out there. I see them for sale, and they get top dollar. Which makes me wonder, back in the day, was it too bold for people's tastes? Did they charge a premium? What's the explanation? With some of mine, they're so rusty that I'm going to be repainting them. All mine are beige. just the way things worked out. No, my debutante is brown, I guess. But I've had three beige princesses. One of them I repainted red about a decade ago, and the other two, we'll see. We'll see. Problem is, when you repaint them, is the backs were also the same matching color as the cabinet. So if you repaint a beige/white model, you get a white back, and then whatever color you painted it for the back. But there is a place that makes reproduction backs, and they do charge a premium for the red, but they do make one. So I may just take the plunge. Okay, let's go hands-free and take a closer look inside. Right in here. The first thing that jumps out at me, so I've seen plenty of these, and if you're wondering what do I look for, externally I want all the knobs to be there, and of course not to be any cracks in the plastic and stuff like that. And when I take the back off, I want to make sure that everything is there that should be there. So left to right, we should have a tuner, and then power transformer, high voltage box, and there should be a cable going into it that goes up to the CRT. And then the main board, and on the left is the horizontal output tube. So if I saw something like that tube was shattered, or it like melted, that would be an indication that there's something wrong with the set and somebody tried running it and that tube malfunctioned. That would be a bad thing. Or if we saw that wires were cut, or parts had been scavenged, or a board was, maybe somebody pulled it out, started working on it, and gave up. That's the kind of stuff I don't want to see. I want to see that everything is present and everything is plugged in. So the tuner is plugged in. That's that guy right there. And that goes to the yoke, and that goes to the back of the cathode ray tube. It has the filament power and brightness and contrast. And it's nice to see all the tubes are there. The board is there, of course. And then I want to see, well, has anybody done any work on it? And yes, some work has been done on this. And some of it looks a little scary. So, that orange thing sticking up, that is a couplate. That is an original. What the thing in front of it is not. It looks like a domino mica cap, of all things, that's been kind of shoved in there. And to the left of that is a tubular something Kind of looks like a power resistor or a cap that's gotten toasty. I don't know, a black cylinder thing that is also not supposed to be there. So what sometimes happens is people will try to do a quick repair without pulling anything out. By that I mean they'll pull the chassis up but not take the board out, and you can't easily get at the bottom of the circuit board because there's a metal covering it in most areas. So people sometimes clip parts out from the top and try to solder new parts onto the remains of the leads, or bypass parts, or in some manner patch up what they think is wrong with it. I think there's a blue cap in the back there next to that tube on the bottom right that's also a replacement. It's not necessarily bad. One reason I don't like to see it is, I mean, the repairs may have been successful, but that would just mean that somebody kept using the set, which means it might be a high-hour set. What I'd like to see is a set that's all original, that got mothballed and has not been touched or turned on in 50 years. Because that increases the chance that there's still a lot of life left in all the parts that are there. Tubes we can replace, and they will last the longest time. We can replace resistors and capacitors, no problem. Power transformer, and that's a tough one. Flyback, also a bit tough. Picture tube being the hardest. Because I've worked on a bunch of these, I do have some very limited supply of spare parts. I have maybe one power transformer, for example. Because this has some dubious looking stuff, I'm not going to try powering it up right now. Some of the other sets I have and I will, because when I didn't see anything that bothered me when I looked inside, but that kind of stuff bothers me. And there's also a layer of crud. It's not just dust, it's grit. Almost like this, I don't know what kind of environment this was in, but I'm sure it went down through these louvers, but yeah, so we want to pull this chassis, we want to blow it out with some compressed air and examine all that's been done to it before we would think about powering this up. But we can test the picture tube, and yeah, definitely smoker set. See that nicotine glaze? And I kind of like it. It helps preserve stuff. I spray some simple green or purple power or Fabuloso on this. That's just all going to run off, and the plastic should look fantastic underneath it. It's just a little extra work that's going to be involved. One final thing before we move on. That's some of the better brass plating I've seen. So these arms, they're steel, and then chrome plated, and then either brass tinted lacquer is sprayed over the chrome, or it's a thin chrome plating or brass plating over the chrome. I haven't yet to determine that. But that's pretty nice. I wouldn't think about doing much to that besides light cleaning. Oh man, something else I don't like to see. One of the original 4 screws is gone, and a flathead put in its place. They should be Phillips. Why don't I like that? It means somebody's been in there and they did something. Fingers crossed. Man, looks like they jammed a wood screw in here. That's exactly what they did. Why? Like Phillips screws are hard to find. Oof. That's on there pretty good. If we're lucky, we can peer around and look for a label. Oof. I think I see it down in there. I don't think I can see it without pulling anything. Not taking the cover off, though. I just want to know what's in there, because the original is 2.68 volts. Replacements are off in 6.3. I kind of need to know which is in there to test it properly. I'm leaning towards this being an original. Oh man, I can just kind of make out. Actually, I'm leaning towards this not being an original, because if it was an original, I should be able to see a Philco label unless it fell off and it's down in the plastic housing somewhere. These picture tubes, even the original 2.68, were fairly reliable. Alright, distributor TV serial number 85134. Distributor TV, so I've never seen that label before. Truly makes me think it's a replacement. Alright, well, so what do I do when I don't know what it is? I try testing it at 2.68, and if it's really a 6.3, the filament will be really dim, and I won't draw much current, in which case I'll increase it. It's really only the two options, 2.68 or 6.3. There's really nothing in between that was, made. Okay, let's see. So we got 2.5 filament volts. That's crazy dim. We have basically no emissions. I'm thinking this is a 6.3. Barely see a glow. I'm going to grab an ammeter to double check, because it should draw 600 milliamps of filament current. I'm using my Suncor universal adapter, which has a separate clip lead on each pin, so it's very easy to disconnect one of them. I put into one lead of my ammeter. Here's the other lead. We have about 1/4 of an amp, so that's far too little. This has got to be a 6.3 volt CRT. Also, I noticed the key is going straight off to the left. I think if it was the original, the key goes down. So let's crank this puppy up to 6.3. Yeah, that looks normal. That is a more typical filament glow. You should be able to see it pretty easily in daylight. Okay. Shorts. Cutoff. We have excellent cutoff control. Get it into the proper area, and we have fantastic emissions. Alright. Scored lucky on the picture tube, and we'll do a life test. Rock solid. I'm going to double check the current to make sure that it is 0.6 amps. I verified it is drawing 0.6 amps at 6.3 volts, so it's definitely been replaced. I'm going to take notes, and I'm putting post-it notes on each of these sets, not only so I know whose is whose, but also need to take note because they must, or they should have changed the filament connection on the CRT to give it the proper voltage down inside the chassis somewhere. It may seem minor, but another reason I hate to see sets that have been worked on before is the extra time involved. For example, just having that one flathead screw. I had to spend a little time finding a different screwdriver just to take out one screw. That kind of stuff drives me nuts. It's just wasting time because somebody else didn't do their job right. So I'm just going to leave it off for now. I will find a matching Phillips head screw to put back in there. And then I'm going to have to reverse engineer or figure out what the heck did they do on that board and undo all of it. That's why I am glad that I have some boards that are 100% original, and I'm going to do one of those first and by doing it I mean installing the new parts, and then use that as a reference for the other boards, so I can just easily just not spend a lot of time worrying about it, just start taking everything apart. Oh man, there's a little metal tongue on the back, so you got to get into a slot when you put them back together. There we go. Helps align the power cord. I'm going to take a slight change of plans. Reason being that I realized this set I restored 2 years ago is a really good reference, so there's no reason for me to restore another one to use as a reference for the rest of the sets. We've got a reference, so let's just dive in and start working on some of the others. Especially since this board, as I kind of found my groove, and I almost done with it, and it took me about 2 hours, and I think I can do the next one even faster, because what I realized is once I gained confidence, instead of snipping out one part at a time and replacing it, I started snipping out a bunch. And if the next board looks, if I can determine the run revision and it looks the same as this more or less, or the other reference board I've got, I'm just going to snip out everything at once and kind of start with half the board being unpopulated, and then just dive in and repopulate everything. Because going back and forth between snipping out, cleaning up the holes, mounting in the part, bending over the leads, flipping it over and soldering, and then going back to clipping out mode and going back and forth, takes up a lot of time. If you just snip off everything and then replace everything, it takes half the time. If you don't screw up. that's the potential downside. Now, have you ever seen one of these before? You just kind of study it. Between the service info and check out the board. It's got notes and reference designators all over it. Every single part. That's R26. That's R30. And these will match the Philco service info. Not the SAMs, the Philco. And the Philco has nice big parts locators, all the same designators. They show the same circuit board. Oh yeah, by the way, too, yeah, the circuit board copper pattern is silk screened on the top, so you can see it on both sides, which is kind of cool. And there are also notes, like BRT arm. What does that mean? That means that goes to the center wiper arm on the brightness control. Tuner, AGC. That goes to the AGC connection on the tuner. Everything is labeled. That's filament 1 connection for the tube, some of the tube filaments. Then there's a fill 2 over here for the rest of the tube filaments. Plate audio out. Tone control for those that have it. Top of the volume control. So on the potentiometer you have 3 connections. This goes to the one end of it. So I see guys labeling all the wires as they take them off. Just keep in mind, everything is labeled on the circuit board. Vertical hold control, linearity, and so on and so forth. I think I misspoke. It's Tom's Princess set that we're going to be working on. We'll get to Tom's Debutante later. This Debutante is the one that's untouched inside, and we were able to get a raster. If I remember right, this is the set that I was scared off of powering up because of the hacks I saw inside, but the picture tube tested good, at least. That's why I wanted to get to this one. For a solo cup hardware. We're going to disconnect all the antenna connections here. Top connection goes to the tuner, and the bottom goes to the internal antenna. If your set has one. They do this so you can configure it differently. You can use an external signal source, you can use the built-in antenna, you can add an external antenna. But you gotta disconnect everything to get the back off. Okay, now the fun bit. We need to pull the power, volume, and contrast knobs off. In the front, that's easy enough to do. And now, the not so fun part, disconnecting everything. On the left side, we've got the tuner power, which is often a little stubborn to get apart. Flat bladed screwdriver, a thin one, can facilitate that. We're getting there. Our pocket knife. Just something to kind of start prying the two connections apart. It's just four connections, rather. Filament power, B+, stuff like that. Okay, yoke, piece of cake, picture tube, piece of cake. The last few things. One, we have to unscrew the control cluster on the front right. Just 2 1/4-inch nuts. We need to disconnect the speaker. 2 plugs you pull out in the front. We need to disconnect the video signal going to the CRT that's plugged into the middle of the circuit board. Those are all pretty easy. The one tricky part is to disconnect the high voltage lead going to the picture tube. That's inside this box. It's a lot easier if you pull the high voltage rectifier tube out, but be careful because you have to disconnect the anode cap from it, and that wire can be brittle and crunchy, and it's going right to the flyback, and you don't want to break that off. Just very gently. I know you can't see what I'm doing. If you've got this set in front of you, you know what I'm doing. I'm pulling the cap off a high voltage rectifier. And now we're going to pull a high voltage tube out, which is the original Philco. All this black is from the high voltage over the years attracting super fine particulate matter. And here's our voltage wire. It's plugged into the base of the socket, and there it's out. And it just goes out through a hole in the front. Piece of cake if you do it that way. I'm really digging having these overhead outlets so I can hook up lights as needed. There, isn't that much better? I could see alright, but I know it helps you guys out. The camera's not as light sensitive as our eyeballs. So there's the high voltage socket down in there. And that's where this tube is sitting. Video wire. It's this guy. Nope. I'm gonna look at the board I'm working on. Can't remember where it is. Video out. It's in the middle of the board towards the back. Got it. Which leaves the control cluster, which I think I misspoke. I think it's 5/16. Maybe just 1/4-inch. Oh, 5/16. That's not 5/16, it's 3/8. That's why I was struggling. Alright, we've got our control cluster loose. That leaves the speaker. Which I'm going to leave till I start pulling the chassis out. So, last thing is to take the chassis nuts out. Do that by leaning it over the edge of the workbench, and these are 5/16. I don't think all the screws are here. It's so often the case when something gets worked on, they leave some out. There's only 3 of them. Half of them are gone. Well, we'll have to replace that. This is 5/16 sheet metal screws with locking washers. Yeah, that was it. Huh. So, I am so curious to see what did they do to this set. Filthy, it's gritty. Oh, that's where the speakers connect. Speakers can connect right to the audio output transformer. Oh yeah, and one last thing is the control cluster. Left, always forget about that. Everything goes in the cup. Let's see. Control cluster. Oh yeah, everything's loose. Wow. I can't even tell what they did because it's so filthy. Well, cleaning is in the first order on this chassis. From what I can see, which isn't a whole lot yet, they broke off one side of the B+ fuse. That's what that thing is, that sand-looking resistor, sand-coated resistor thing. It's a fusible resistor. It's a special type of resistor there to limit the surge current to the rectifiers for B+, but also to burn out safely if there's an overload of current and protect the set. And often they are. Caps get leaky, draw excessive current, the fuse pops. Sometimes people will take, I've seen some ugly things, just like a coat hanger cut off and shoved into there to restore continuity. Not good. But anyways, what I'm most curious about is what is that? It's actually not that bad. I mean, aside from the filth, not very little has been done to it. All this looks to be original. I think there are just some minor repairs here. Let's try doing a little archaeology here. Let's compare and contrast too. So, here's what I'm working on. So in this area, they replaced this cap, and that's a 1,000-volt cap. That's one that it's for feedback for a vertical output into the oscillator. That's I guess a high failure part. So they replaced basically all the caps in the vertical circuit. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the rest of this is all original. Yeah. So I think what we'll see when we get down in here is, yeah, they clipped off the old caps and wired in the new parts to the stub of the old one. Well, it cleans off really easy. I got a feeling whatever's on here is just, it's almost like debris from something. I really noticed it up here. It's like grit. The set isn't that dirty though. It like just all went through the holes and right down onto the chassis. We just threw like a handful of dirt onto the chassis or something. It's crazy. In other words, if I flipped this over and shook it, probably a lot of this stuff would just come off. So that's going to be something I got to think about, is how do I want to clean this? I don't want to use compressed air and blow it all over my workshop. Don't really want to go outside either. It's in the 20s right now. For now, we'll do this. I'll get out a vacuum cleaner, shop vac, and kind of loosen it up and try to suck up some of it. I can tell is also kind of baked on, like under these caps. So this thing I was puzzling about, that they used a mica cap for a replacement. Let's see what the original was. Let's see. It's this guy, 6800. Which is kind of big for a mica cap. It's really expensive if you went out and bought one now. Maybe they had one lying around. These others are overkill too. I think the original was 0.1 microfarad 200 volt. They put a 600 volt in. That's why it's so big. So I'd be less afraid to try plugging it in now that I've seen what they did. They just tacked in 4 new caps. But in order to do that, I gotta hook everything back up and then unhook it again to pull it back out to continue working on it. Do I want to do that? Not really, to be honest. On the other hand, I would kind of like to see if this thing has some life. Let's see. I do have one head unit that's loose. Could we plug it into this? Well, it's on the workbench. So you got to be careful too, because I think some of the head unit CRTs I have are 6 volt CRTs, which requires changing. I think it's this wire. So normally they're 2.68 volts. Let me think. I'm not crazy about putting it back in, but maybe. Well, let me shake the dirt off of it first, and then see if that leads to a decision. Well, it's a little bit better. And I decided, yeah, I need the practice anyways. Let's reassemble this briefly and try to power it up. I did not see any significant issues as I visually inspected this. No caps have been blown out, no charred parts, no broken off wires or anything like that. It was just really dirty. That was actually pretty easy. I am going to leave this control cluster out. There's plenty of lead length. On, off, volume, contrast. Just turn this around. I'll get a cheater cord so we can plug it in. Okay, here we go. Turned on all right. Speaker is responding, the tubes are lighting. I mean, the speaker is responding. Let's see, brightness. Can't tell if the 6CG7, so the damper tube is not lit. Okay, without the damper tube being lit, we're not getting anywhere. I'm just going to swap it out. I've had this problem on other sets, and the problem ended up being that there was an issue with the circuit board not making good contact. The tube seems kind of wonky. Oh, maybe because they didn't use all the pins on it. I do that sometimes. Let's see. 6DA4, alright. That's a little bit of a quality control issue there. Someone was sleeping. That would be a GE tube. Very crooked GE. Doesn't mean it won't work. Okay, let's try that again. Doesn't look like the damper tube is lit or horizontal oscillator tube. I'm just poking around the tubes a little bit, see if I can get them to come to life at all. Bingo! See that right in the middle of the screen? Near the end of that power resistor? This. It's broken on the right side. So I'm going to get a solder blob on there, and then let's try it again. I think I got it. That's where a temperature controlled iron comes in handy, because you need some oomph to kind of melt those stakes back on. Hey, we got damper lightage. It's 6CG7 there, though. Looks suspiciously dark. Everything else is lit up, though. Ooh, crackleage. We have light. Maybe that 6CG7 is just, maybe the filament's just kind of dim. Alright, it's something. Something. Tuner's working too. Cool. Now we might hear something on channel 6, which is kind of a quasi radio station these days. I just don't know what channel 6 is. Okay, it's on channel 6 now. Use my finger as an antenna. Yeah, a little too much to ask for, I suppose. But hey, not bad, not a bad start. All the major components are good. The flyback is fine, the yoke is fine. Speaker, no reception, but if I touch the antenna terminal, we get a little noise. Cool, so we know all the major components are good. Picture tube, flyback, yoke, power transformer, audio stuff, the tuner, I mean everything. We're good to go. It's just a matter of, well, overhauling everything now.